Welcome back, everyone. I'm J.R. Flatter, the Chief Learning Officer at Flatter Incorporated. I'm here with Megan Long and Miss Brittany Chang. Today we're talking about ISO 9000 and 27000 certifications, but also on a broader perspective, the process itself. Is it worth doing? What value do we receive? What challenges did we have in seeking and sustaining those relationships or those certifications? So how's everybody doing?
We're doing well.
Yeah,
Good week?
I think we're both doing much better after the August audit is now over with.
And we finally received the actual certificate. That was super exciting. I was showing everybody in the office.
Yeah, so you know you're a geek when you're showing people your ISO 27001 certification and you're excited about it.
Yes, I'm well aware. I have been called that before, yes.
Well, for everybody who's listening perspective, you'll received your 27001 literally days ago, right?
That's right, yeah.
So we've had the 9001 for what, close to a decade?
Yep, we got that in spring of 2009.
Yeah, so even longer. So you were involved in that, right? 11 years ago, you went through that pain. And now you and Megan and Alexandria, who I don't think is joining us today, were involved in the 27001. So a lot of scars, a lot of lessons learned, I'm hoping that we could share. And then we wrote an essay earlier in the week that you saw about the pros and cons of seeking the ISO certifications. So we can certainly talk about those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with that, let's just jump in. So it's very fresh in your mind, the 27001, but I'm sure it brought back a lot of memories about 9001.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us. What are some of the lessons learned? Rabbit holes we don't want to go down, things we absolutely need to do.
Right. Well, I think definitely went a lot smoother than our 9001 pursuit. I think, we didn't quite know what we were getting into. And in the quality management world, when you talk to ISO auditors and even CMMI registrars and things like that, they call ISO 9001 the mothership. So once you've got this really nice backbone of a quality management system and a way to document policies and share them and communicate them with your employees, that becomes really easy then to apply to other standards, including CMMI development services, CMMC, your NIST quality management and compliance plans, even your HR compliance. So I think what's really great about ISO 9001 is it gives you that vehicle to kind of attach on additional certifications.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it was definitely helpful that you guys had gone through the 9001 initially, because that definitely helped us to know what was going to be needed, what was going to be asked. So it really helped us be able to lay the groundwork and then really work through and work with everybody else in the company, sit down with HR, understanding really what their processes are, what will work for them, what won't work for them, especially with the ISO 27001, because there is cybersecurity elements and IT elements. So you don't want to bog everybody down and all the users down. You want them to be efficiently doing their job, but making sure that we're still being secure.
Yeah.
Sure. So talk to us a little bit about the mechanics of what is ISO? Why would you ever want to go do it? And what are some of the sustainment challenges of keeping it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Megan and I talked a little bit about lessons learned and what it takes to gain and then maintain these certifications. And I think it's really important that you have one person who's dedicated to it, to getting the certification and to having that commitment to kind of maintaining the beast.
Yeah.
So in that case for this certification, it was Megan. So she was responsible for looking at what the new requirements on 27001 were, and then you really just have to, and we do this all the time with requests for proposal from the federal government, but you take all the requirements, put them into a matrix, map your existing policies and existing practices to the new standard, like 27001, for example. And hopefully you can check a lot of boxes with what you're already doing. which we were able to do with the 9001. And then also just in our pursuit with NIST 800-171 compliance, we're already doing a lot of these good security practices in our information system. So then you identify the gaps, right? So I think a lot of people are familiar with the term gap assessment or gap review.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, okay, what am I required to do that I'm not doing today? What's it going to take to get me to that compliance level? So we started this process, I think around like March, right as COVID was hitting.
Yes, it was right as COVID was starting.
Yeah, we kind of started that process, and you eventually have to hire an auditor to come in and do your audit. And luckily, our auditor was really great in working with us and actually collaborating during the gap phase. And then we had a phase 1 audit and then a phase 2 audit. So all of those steps along the way helped us make sure that it was going to be a success by the time we got to the phase 2 audit.
Yep.
So if you hadn't done this before, I know for things like GSA schedules and sometimes even for large IDIQs, we hire on consultants to help us out. Would I need a consultant if I was looking at a blank chalkboard and deciding to go for one of these certifications?
Sure. I'll let Megan start with that one.
So I would say possibly, but not necessarily, especially with cybersecurity. If you look across, even if it's NIST, ISO, and even the CMMC that's coming up, there's very specific pillars within cybersecurity that you are expected to meet. So the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of the resources. So there are some very basic standards to every cybersecurity program. So that's extremely helpful because then there is a lot of tools that help you, especially with looking at your risk, identifying where those types of gaps are. So I think it also depends though on the size of the company, right? So I think we're a smaller company, so it's easier for us to sit down with everybody, say, okay, this is what we should be doing. This is where we think we're missing things and what can we do to kind of bring everything up where it needs to be. But perhaps maybe if it's a larger company that was implementing it where you have, multiple systems we have development and you have a huge procurement and things like that, then most likely a consultant at that point would be a lot more helpful.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, it's kind of just the simple, what's cost, schedule, budget amongst those three? What are my priorities? Am I looking to do this really quickly? Am I looking to do it very cheaply? So I think if you're willing to have a 2-year schedule in a low budget, you can totally take it in-house, and it's just going to take a long time. And then if you have a bigger budget and want to do it more quickly, I would, if you have those resources, I would definitely recommend that you take advantage of best practices in industry, because ISO 9001 for services has been around for many, many years. And there's things like for under $1,000, you can buy an ISO document library for 9001. And that is a huge time-saving tool to give you, 100 standard operating procedures that you can tailor to your company that are already compliant. And then you really just worry about, how do I tweak this to meet my process, rather than reinventing the wheel that's been a well-oiled machine for decades for ISO 9001. So I guess it depends what your priorities are.
Yeah, definitely time, space, continuum, dollars, how fast. I have to tease both of you because you've been around DoD so long that you're throwing acronyms around and you're not even recognizing that you're doing it.
Everyone knows what CIA stands for, right?
So you mentioned NIST and you mentioned CMMC. So I can say those words, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and I can say cybersecurity maturity model certification. Why are those relevant to me?
Yeah. So, as much as we like to consider ourselves thought leaders and we're, going after 27001, really it was motivated by a requirement. So the DoD, of course, has the DFAR, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, and 87% of DoD contracts taken out of a sample had the NIST, had the DFAR clause, which requires the NIST 800-171 compliance. And so, we've had that requirement for a few years. Certainly the past couple of years, we've had requirements with that DFAR clause. And CMMC is a little bit expanded from the controls of NIST. So there's over 100 controls identified in the NIST 800-171. For example, password policies, physical security requirements, like having a locked door and maybe a log to sign in when you come and visit a site, escorts for non-citizens, things like that. So each of those are, just a couple I mentioned of the 100 controls in the NIST 800-171. And then CMMC expands it a little bit, but the purpose of the CMMC is really to create a vehicle in the federal government to assess where the contractors actually are, rather than having the contractor self-certify and just say, hey, by signing and agreeing to this contract, I'm compliant with that DFAR clause. They're taking a step further and saying, show me. And so many contractors out there don't have that mechanism to show the contractor what they're doing and that the controls are in place. Are the controls documented even? So, you might require your 5 employees to change their password every 30 days, but is that in an SOP? Is that in a policy in Microsoft 365, or are you just kind of reminding them via email? So it's kind of taking it to that next maturity level, as the name implies.
Yeah, with CMMC, it's all about the auditability, to make sure that everybody is on that same level playing field. And then by making it auditable, it's really going to enable them to gather the facts and the data to see, is this working? Are we seeing smaller amount of attacks? Are we really starting to build up this strength and protecting, our important government assets? And so that's really, the meat of the CMMC.
So what was that NIST 100-871 you said?
800-171.
Does it scare you at all that you know that?
Well, I've been looking at it a little too often. I couldn't cite the DFAR clause, but I do have it written down somewhere.
You're funny. So I've been hearing a lot about the cybersecurity maturity model certification. Is it really going to happen? Should I start getting ready now? I've heard some hints that it might be imploding upon itself. What are your personal and professional opinions on where we're at and where we're going with that?
Yeah, I think the safest route is to prepare, but to kind of check the boxes that you're already supposed to be practicing today. So today, most of us are supposed to be complying with that DFAR clause. So that's our primary focus right now, is just saying, hey, are we compliant with the 800-171, which we're already required to do? And then what are the gaps between the additional requirements that CMMC's asking us to do? Are we compliant with those new controls? I think it's wise for industry to start looking at that and identifying what type of infrastructure changes they would have to make. Estimating costs, estimating schedule, because I do believe in 2021 there are going to be requests for proposal that require CMMC. Just this past Friday, the 18th of September, the first round of auditors was certified. And so, whereas before we were kind of scratching our heads saying, how are they going to audit us if there are no certified auditors? Well, now they have a body of certified auditors. So they are moving forward. I think 2022 is probably a fair estimate of when we're going to see this widespread across industry, and where you're really going to need to have it. I don't think you're going to need it in 2021 unless you're one of these large large prime contractors who you already know that a requirement in your pipeline is going to require it, because
Yeah.
they've identified some specific requirements that are going to require CMMC compliance.
Yes, I agree. It's definitely 100% happening. I don't think it's imploding on itself. I think they're definitely still working through, some of the controls and, are we going to add a little bit more to, level 3, a little more to level 4? What are we going to kind of allow to be a check in the box if you have an ISO audit? So I think there's some of those things still being worked out, but I've been on multiple calls since CMMC started. And another, amazing thing to think about is a lot of this started coming out December, January of, hey, get ready, hey, get ready. And they already have auditors in place. Mm-hmm. And that's a significant move to get from, hey, this is going to happen, we're still working some controls, to actually having auditors and saying, we're going to be able to start doing this and start putting this information into RFIs and RFPs. And they also have a list of, service providers. So we have, spoken with a couple of consultants regarding CMMC and those controls, and now they're starting to be certified to be providers to be doing these type of gap assessments. Mm-hmm. So the tools are starting to get in place. So I think definitely it's happening. And I agree with Brittany, it's probably going to be, 22-ish more, where you're going to see that huge bulk, but it's definitely something to start planning now and laying that groundwork. You never want to, want something to sneak up on you, especially something that's going to be this important, and especially to bidding on contracts and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of interesting though, because on the flip side of watching CMMC grow, we already have, quite a few requirements like DCAA audits, for example. And I'm going to date us a little bit, but we haven't had a DCAA audit since before 2010. And that is a requirement, to be compliant with DCAA practices and the generally approved accounting principles and all of that. So it'll be interesting to see the life cycle of CMMC and if they're able to kind of maintain the level of rigor that I think they really want to see out of it.
Yeah, I've seen this kind of thing a few times before, where they've tried to create something in good faith and it's just become a self-licking ice cream cone to some extent. The CVE certifications for SDVOSBs has become and remains a bureaucratic challenge. The DCA auditing, Defense Contract Audit Agency, is one of those things often required, but very, very, very difficult to get. That's the reason we haven't had one in over a decade. You see a lot of the language in RFPs, requests for proposal, but when you ask for an audit, it's nearly impossible to get one. Is there any chance of that happening with the CMMC?
I think that's why there was such a strong push to decentralize the auditing authority and not make it a government function. Mm-hmm. I guess I'd call that a win, that they went out to industry and they're having industry become certified to audit. So, I think industry will always respond to that demand, and more auditors will come if and the price will go down. I think plenty of people are going to get certified to be auditors eventually. I do kind of get concerned about RFP dates. An RFP day becomes important to Flatter. We want to go after something. It requires CMMC, and the auditors are backlogged, and we can't get it. So yeah. I do see that as a risk, and that's something I would hope that contracting officers, they always have discretion. And so I would hope they would be able to counterbalance that with, hey, show me your security plan of how you're NIST compliant. I see that you have 27,001, and so those are mitigating factors in my mind. So that's how I kind of see it going forward, is that, contracting officers are going to go into some level of negotiation and say, hey, I put out an RFI and only 2 of my 15 contractors have this cert, so therefore I'm going to make it a little bit more flexible until industry catches up. So I would hope to see it play out in a way like that.
Okay, fair enough. I'm thinking of a mixed martial arts analogy. Never leave it in the hands of the judges. Always go for a finish. I would hate to run my business with a hope and a prayer that the contracting officer was going to move in my favor on a certification I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. Let's manage our risk, get the certification before we need it. So we talked about 27001. We talked about CMMC. Are they one and the same? How are they different? And if I have one, do I have the other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what's really great about ISO in particular is it really helps you create that mothership that we talked about before of maintaining a quality management system, communicating your policies with your employees, and then also having a mind for continuous improvement. And certainly cybersecurity is one of those things that's ever changing. And risk reviews are a part of 27001. So we're always looking and saying, hey, what are some new threats out there in industry? What are some new vulnerabilities that we may have and new tools we're using? And just constantly be evaluating. So the short answer is no. To have ISO 27001, there's been a little bit of dialogue about potentially being grandfathered then into CMMC level 1 and 2 with your ISO 27001. I think if you're looking at CMMC 3 and higher, there are some gaps between ISO 27001 and CMMC. However, you can easily incorporate those SOPs into your 27001 practice and make it compliant with CMMC level 3. And that's what our plan is. We, at Flatter, for example, we have one quality management system, and that system is compliant to ISO 9001-2008, ISO 27001-2013, CMMI development. So all of those standards are, we have one quality management system that complies with all of those different standards. So you can definitely get your ISO practice to a place where it complies with CMMC.
And I agree 100%. It's the CMMC, once you get into those like level 3s and 4s, there's just a little bit more rigor added. But by doing, you know, the ISO 27001, number one, it puts everybody in a mind frame of what should we be doing, how should we be doing this, and really getting everybody in that cybersecurity mind frame. So then as you're moving along and adding those additional controls and that additional rigor, it's a lot easier to kind of bring everybody up to that level.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about this audit process. How often, how long, what do they look at? How do I prepare? How do I even find an auditor?
Yeah, for CMMC, you know, who knows? I think it still remains to be seen what those audits are going to look like. I've heard that everything from, for a level 3, for example, a 5-day audit to a 3-week audit. And I think that also is dependent on, you know, number of employees, number of locations, number of controls, because I'm sure there's going to be controls that you're going to say, hey, this doesn't apply to me. So therefore I don't have to be audited on this control. For ISO, it's really simple. There's a list of registrars who are able to give certifications, and they report up to a bigger organization called ANAB, and they audit the auditors and will do some sampling and make sure that the audits are compliant with their standards. So I think similarly with CMMC, we have our auditors now, and the government, you know, may shadow some audits or, you know, have them submit documentation to make sure that they're maintaining their level of rigor for the audits. I think there is a published list of auditors now for CMMC, and I'm sure they're scheduling out audits for people. And I think basically they'll take a survey from industry of how many employees do you have, how many locations am I auditing, what's the scope of this audit, and then that will spit out how many days of audit is required.
Mm-hmm. And then how about dollar costs, manpower costs? I'm a small business owner. I've got limited time, limited resources. How do I know whether I should invest in ISO or put my dollars and time somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's kind of neat about CMMC is it implies that level of maturity, and it is almost a decision or a measure of where you are in your maturity as a company. Mm-hmm. We've been in business since 2002, over 18 years, and so we're definitely at a more mature stage in our development where we want to prime a lot. We want to maintain important and large GWAC prime vehicles. We want to have access to a certain population of customers, and therefore we need a quality management system to win, Homeland Security PAX 2, to win OASIS, to win Alliant, CIOSP3. Seaport E maybe even required a quality management system at some point, but for a lot of those large vehicles, if you want to prime those, you've got to have some sort of maturity in your process. So for us, I think it's a no-brainer to pursue it. If you're, a brand new small business and you're looking for subcontracting opportunities, I don't know that I'd necessarily prioritize ISO. But then again, your prime contractor is probably going to flow down that DFAR clause for NIST compliance. So on whatever level that maps to your needs, you have to be compliant. So you can document that very simply in an Excel sheet and in a 5-page security plan that says, hey, here's some vulnerabilities and how I'm going to bridge that gap. So I think as a lowest bar, the focus should be on how to get your small business NIST compliant.
Okay, sure. Great advice. Yeah, you just said an acronym within an acronym. ANAB is American National Standards Institute. That's the A. And then the NAB is National Accreditation Board. So good for you.
Well, I'm glad you're Googling us in the background.
So I think, as a small business and I'm trying to get on a team, I tell everybody that asks, and a lot of people who don't, you need to have at least 2 things to bring to the team to be welcome to the team, because there are 10,000 people with one discriminator that they can bring to my team. And those kind of discriminators are, what is my socioeconomic status? What is my past performance? Who are my customers? What do I do for a living? It's an endless, do I know the customer? Does the customer know me? Any one of those can be a unique differentiator. And to come to a prime contractor and ask for a place on their team requires at least 2. One of them is usually your small business status of one flavor or another. And then where do I get that second one? Because in many ways it's chicken and egg, right? You need past performance, but no one will bring you on the team because you don't have it. And so a certification can be a purposeful discriminator that you can add to your quiver, but it's not going to win you business alone and by itself. It takes many quivers, many arrows in that quiver to be appealing to a prime contractor and also to win a prime contract. So I wouldn't recommend investing for the capability by itself, but if you need a discriminator to get you on a team, or you need a discriminator, a lot of these big contracts that you mentioned earlier are being pointed out. You get so many points for this, so many points for this, so many points for this. And so if you need a few extra points to get you over the hurdle, you might seek the differentiator for that. But as we were talking about yesterday, I think seek the certification for the discipline, not for the sheepskin. Mm-hmm. You can hang it on your wall, you can put it on your business card, you can put it on your website, but it's not going to earn you business by itself.
Right.
And it's not the differentiator that many other differentiators could be. Mm-hmm. And as we've already discussed, there are real opportunity costs associated with seeking and sustaining. So you talk about the certification process, and then the auditing is you have an internal auditor on staff, make sure you're staying compliant, and then you have to fly somebody out here. Is it every other year for the ISO? I forget exactly.
Yeah, so for ISO, it's at least, we do 2 internal audits a year with our certified auditor who is a W-2 at Flatter. And then we also do at least 1 annual audit with our registrar. So they fly out, like you said. We actually had our first virtual one in August, which was interesting, and that worked pretty well. And saved us a little bit of travel money, but yeah, it is a commitment for sure.
Okay.
I think in my personal opinion, you know, as CEO, the biggest commitment from my perspective is being stuck in that room with the auditor for an 8-hour day, because you can't do anything else. You have to somewhat turn off. And luckily, you know, I have Megan here and she's fully capable of driving without me. So, yeah, to be tied down and not be able to answer customer requests or even do proposals during that time frame that the auditor is there, you want to try to limit that as much as possible.
Yeah, so that's something to think about. If I'm building in my brand new company and I think I need an ISO certification, or I know I need a CMMC certification, or I'm thinking about CMMI, and I was going to plant that seed in Megan's mind. That's probably next. CMMI level 3. Get ready.
Well, we're almost there, to be honest, on that one.
Say again?
I said we're almost there on that one, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. What do we say? Zip, zip, zip?
Zip, zip, zip. Just knock it out. Give yourself 2 weeks in a locked door, and you'll get there.
Get it done.
We were joking with Megan because I think we had an audit like the first week of August, and the auditor's like, I could be back here in 2 weeks to do phase 2. And we all nodded our heads and said, yes, let's do it. And Megan's like, no.
Well,
we did do it. We did get through it. Yes.
You just reminded me that we haven't even talked about, and we should probably save it for another discussion, but facility certification. We've had a top secret facility clearance for our entire 19 years in business, and that comes with its own requirements and compliance and manpower and real dollars.
Absolutely.
So all of this is going on simultaneous to all of the other business phases we have, is, you know, identifying where qualifying is it real, capturing it, filling in all the white spaces we can, and knowledge that we don't have or performance that we don't have, teaming partners.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because CMMC is actually kind of shining a light on the fact that your FCL is inextricably interwoven with your cybersecurity presence. I mean, our auditor, Randy Stacy, who we love, he would literally walk around and look at manufacturers on hardware, ask about our information security practices. So I think those are going to become even more and more important, that your FSO and your information security manager are maybe even the same person, but definitely communicating and collaborating.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've got 2 new topics already in our conversation this morning, or this afternoon, I guess. And we're going to have to do one just on acronyms. That'll be fun. We just tossed out another one that 99.9% of us know, W-2. But in our world, that means full-time employee, or we even have part-time W-2s, or 1099s, which is the part-time IRS form that people fill out at the end of the year. It's so funny. You get so embedded in these things, you don't even realize that your language is awash in them.
I think Megan and I would like to do another 1-hour session just on the human element and how we're bringing up our training practices and really kind of creating a culture of security.
Yeah, talking about that, we got a few minutes left. I'll put it on the list.
You want to expand a little bit, Megan, on what it takes to get everyone up to speed?
So I think, I mean, with employees and the users, they're our first line of defense. And so it's really important that you are really teaching them, not just saying, do this. Because when you say do this, then it seems like a roadblock to them. They're like, all I want to do is my work, come in here, sit down. Why are we doing all these things? Why can't we just, download the software? So really getting the employees to understand why we're doing it, that, it's not just to make life difficult. I think that is really the key. We want every employee, when they come in and sit down at the computer, to really understand that they're holding the keys to the kingdom. So when they're logging in, they're not only protecting, the corporate information and the financial information, but they're also protecting their own personal information. They're protecting their colleagues' information, and they're protecting, the customer's information, because they may not specifically have access to, human resource records. But if a bad actor gets a hold of their password, or they walk away and the computer isn't locked and somebody gets access, then they are able to see everything and they can get into the system. So we really want all of our employees to really understand what we're doing. So we do, review all of the SOPs that, we do, individual trainings on specific things like our password manager, how to review, phishing, emails, things like that. We go over our SOPs with our biweekly calls. And that's really important, especially with the SOPs, that they know where to find them, making sure that when you're even writing those SOPs, that, it's done in an understandable and in a manner where they can follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. You're right. We could talk for an entire session on the communication required. And I'm sure people like me at the senior level of the organization are the hardest to get over the hurdle, because we always pretend we're so busy. So yeah, definitely we'll come back to that. And your comments remind me a little bit of what we were talking about a while ago, and that is, don't pursue it just for the certification or just for the sheepskin, but actually live the standards in your day-to-day business practices. I remember back when we first got the 9001, that was part of our mantra, is we want this to be part of our business process, not just something on our business card. So building that kind of culture is very difficult, but in the long run, it brings great dividends.
Yeah.
So CMMI's in your future. What does the next few months look like for you?
Oh gosh. So a little bit like we said, I think the next few months are going to be closing the gap between the new controls required by CMMC and the controls we already have in place. And are there gaps? And then, patching those gaps. So I think that's the next thing we're going to do, is do a CMMC level 3 gap analysis, because that's where we believe we need to be, is at level 3 for the work we're doing and for the materials that we're handling. So yeah, we had a little bit of a break. We took a breather for about 2 weeks, and now
it's done. Now it's time to hit the road.
Yeah, and we're also physically building out a new space. We purchased a new building here in Spotsylvania, and so just little things about making sure the floor plan has physical security built in. And that's what's kind of fun, is once you've got a baseline set up, then everything you build from today forward has security in mind. And it's not an afterthought. You don't have to patch holes. You actually design with security in mind. And I think that's the ideal that we're hoping our industrial base gets to as well, where when you're designing acquisitions and designing hardware, designing software, that they're built to security standards.
Yeah, that's incredible benefit and advantage for you. So I don't have any additional questions. Any thoughts before we check off, things that I forgot to ask you, or things you thought were important that you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so. One comment I didn't get to that I had in my notes here was that there's no magic bullet. You know, there's really no one path to get your company where you want to go with regard to a certification or a standard. It really has to be standard to what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to achieve. And so I could give advice all day long, but I think Megan and I will kind of say, hey, if anyone wants to reach out to us and ask for advice for your particular situation, please do that. Because there is no one right answer, but I think in talking through it, you can kind of get where you need to be with your budget and with your time constraints.
And also just remembering that cybersecurity, I mean, it's ever evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is really embedding that culture, because there's always going to be new threats, new vulnerabilities, new things that you're having to address.
Mm-hmm.
And you really need all your people behind you to, when those things come up and when you need to make those changes, really making sure they understand so that they're reporting phishing and, you know, things of that nature. It's ever evolving, and it's going to be an ever evolving process. Even if you are audited and do have certifications, it's really a mindset that you need to stay in and stay on top of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, great. Thank you. Well, I think we have a ton of information that you've passed along for our listeners and readers. So thank you very much. And as always, you mentioned it already, Brittany, but anybody wants to follow up and have a follow-on conversation, our door is always open, ready, willing, and able to spend time with our peers in this industry and help them in any way we can.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So have a great day, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.